My name's Damien Gibbons. I'm a Stephen leader, one of the two Stephen leaders for the Stephen Ministry Program with myself and Linda Fleischer. I was a Stephen minister from 2008, April of 2008 when we were commissioned, until May of 2011 when I attended the leadership training course in St. Louis and became a Stephen leader. The difference between the two is that Stephen ministers often do the one-on-one personal care relationships, caring relationships, whereas Stephen leaders do more of a coordination type of role. We don't often have care receivers of our own. We more help with the Stephen ministers as they have their own caring relationships. We give them supervision, we help give them guidance, give them feedback, anything that they need really that we can do to support them. So for just over 5 years now, I've been involved with Stephen Ministry. I got involved with Stephen Ministry because I've gone through several depressions myself. 3 of them have been clinically diagnosed and treated. The first one in 2001 very nearly ended my life. I came very close to killing myself, and I had no intention of telling anybody about what I was going through, but I'm an extrovert and was in a situation where I really had nobody to talk to. There was a summer where I had no real friends. I was working a graveyard shift as a security guard, and so even my day-to-day interaction with people was gone. I was living by myself at the time, and started to really just withdraw into myself, which for an extrovert is a very dangerous thing. And got to the point where I was so miserable that I just didn't want to live anymore. And about a month after I had decided that, while I was still kind of working up the courage, I had a chance conversation with a friend of mine. And it wasn't supposed to be anything deep. It was just we were walking somewhere and talking, and I told her everything that I couldn't tell Melanie, that I couldn't tell anybody else that was close to me. And the weight that came off of my chest when I first managed to talk about this was enormous. And this was just somebody who I barely knew, just an acquaintance, who realized very quickly that I had a serious problem, and she talked with me for a lot longer than we intended to talk that day, than you would normally talk with someone you'd just say hi to usually. We were walking somewhere, and we got to where we were walking, and we just kept going because I needed to get it off my chest. I got help after that, some medication, but mostly a lot of therapy, a lot of talking it out with people, and I realized just how important that was, the ability to be able to talk to somebody who's willing to listen and to not give you advice, to not tell you what you should do to fix it, because they aren't qualified to do so, and frankly not many people are, really just yourself a lot of times. But she gave me really good feedback, just a lot of active listening without being trained to do so. She just did it instinctively. And when I learned about Stephen Ministry and what they do and how we talk to people and how we help them, I thought that's something I really want to be able to do, because I'd already come out of, at that point, 3 depressions, and each one had been shorter than the last because I recognized the warning symptoms earlier, sought help earlier, and I've been depression-free for about 5 years now, since not long before I became a Stephen minister. It was really when I ended my last bout with it, and I think this is a large part of it. Being able to shift your focus outside of yourself sometimes helps a lot. So that's why I became a Stephen minister, along with Melanie and several other people in the church, many of whom are still active in the program. So yeah, that's me, and that's why I became a Stephen minister. When Stephen ministers, they go through 50 hours of training. So you go through training by multiple Stephen leaders. Leaders teach this course. We're part of a consortium here at Salem, so it's not just Salem Lutheran Church. There are several other churches in the Catonsville, Ellicott City area, Columbia area as well, that are part of this consortium, and we help each other out. So all of the Stephen leaders that were able to be a part of our training from those other churches trained this current first crop of Stephen ministers from Salem. Had a bunch of people trained in lay ministry, not to be counselors in an official legal sense, but just as somebody who people in the church could talk to, people who had received training in how to do what we call reflective listening. You know, somebody talks and then you ask them questions based on what they've said. Not to say, well, my advice to you is that phrase is never in a Stephen minister's vocabulary. It's not part of our training. Never give advice. And that was what the early Stephen ministers did and what we do today. Well, some of the stuff that we thought might be useful to talk about, and I've talked about some of this already. What is Stephen ministry? Stephen ministry is a peer counseling program, is probably the best term for it. It's grief counseling, but we're there for when people are going through any kind of thing where they just need someone to listen to them, someone to talk to. Some examples are a divorce, difficult times at work sometimes, any stressful time, like we had somebody who didn't become a care receiver, but they inquired about it because a friend of theirs was about to get married, and they thought this friend who was having a really hard time with all the wedding preparations might need some help, might need somebody to talk to. We also help with empty nest syndrome, which comes up, you know, or even pretty much any kind of depression, really. Stephen Ministry is there for any kind of tough time in your life. We're also very confidential, something that is maybe not known to people. That we try to get that message out, but anything you say to your Stephen minister is completely confidential. We do have supervision meetings where we sit as a group and we talk about how our caring relationships are going in very general terms. If there are any concerns that are deemed too private for the general group, that might require a name, for example, or a specific problem, Stephen ministers are always free to call a Stephen leader at home or meet them in person and discuss what might need to be discussed. Examples of this might be if somebody, care receiver, has a problem that turns out to be more extreme than we were originally led to believe, the Stephen minister would probably go to their Stephen leader and say, this is the situation, does this person need professional help? Am I still qualified to handle this situation? If so, how? And sometimes the answer to that is no, that no, this person does need professional help. But the Stephen minister or the Stephen leader will absolutely make sure that that person gets that help. That's part of our pact, part of our commitment to that caring relationship, to not just say, well, this person needs more help than I can get, and then just leave them behind. We make sure that person gets help. So we do have names and numbers of people that we can talk to. In the example of potentially a suicide, for example, we have suicide hotline numbers, and we do know professional counselors that are in an address book that we keep, that should that come up, I could say, you know, so-and-so may be a good match for this particular doctor, or we know that this doctor has dealt with depression cases a lot of times, so maybe let's hook them up with this particular doctor or this counselor. It may just be a person with a master in social work who's got an emphasis on counseling. It may not need to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but somebody who's just a trained counselor, really knows what they're doing. So. Stephen ministry caring relationships are always single gender too, because sometimes people can take things the wrong way. It can be more difficult sometimes for men to open up to women too, for example. So I would only ever be a Stephen minister to a man. Melanie would only ever be a Stephen minister to a woman. So it's an important tenet of it, to make sure that there's no emotions confused in there, and to also do what we believe is the best for helping people to open up by staying within the gender. So really the only other thing I could say, how does one connect with us? The easiest way to connect with us is to contact Linda Fleischer or myself. Our names and numbers are both in the Salem Church directory. If you or somebody you love that might need a helping hand, wishes to have a Stephen minister assigned, we will certainly do that. Also, because we are blessed to be part of this consortium, if you feel that your issue is something that is publicly known within the church, for example, and that even general details given at a Stephen minister or peer supervision meeting would be revealing of who you are, we have this wonderful consortium, and all I would do is help the referral. I would explain what was going to happen in a Stephen minister relationship, and then once everything was set, I'd send off an email to the consortium, all of the Stephen leaders at all the other churches, and say, hey, I've got a person here, a woman who needs help, for example. She's dealing with depression related to a divorce. Do you have any Stephen ministers available that might be suited to this task? It'd be very general, but they do need to know some of the details as far as what the specific case is, like a woman dealing with a divorce and the depression that resulted of that, because some Stephen ministers are better suited to handle that. Some who may be divorcees are perhaps not suited to deal with that because it's too fresh for them. But also some divorcees may be the best people to talk to about that, people who've come to terms with their own divorce. So there are a lot of different situations, but there are a lot of different Stephen ministers who all have a unique story and a unique reason for becoming a Stephen minister, a unique path at least. I think the reason's fairly common, a desire to help people, but the path that led them to that particular calling gives them unique skills that may help one person more than another. So
I'm going to stop for a second.